everyone. Welcome to today's episode of Cyber Smart Conversations with Harsha. I'm so delighted to be joined today by Chuck Nicewonger. With over 30 years of successful leadership experience in technology, Chuck's role ranged from operating his own consulting company, nicenets.com, to directing the IT strategy and operations of a real estate investment management firm. Thank you for joining, Chuck. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure. I was surprised when you asked me, and I'm glad to do it. So anytime you need some help, you just give me a call. I'll help you out.
Always pleasure talking to you, Chuck.
Yes, thank you.
This is one of the questions I always ask before we begin the session. Tell us about your career path.
Okay. Well, I started in the United States Air Force right out of high school. In fact, I turned down an academic scholarship for Purdue University and decided to go into the Air Force instead because it was 1976. The GI Bill was still active, and so I was able to get 4 years of school paid for, along with 6 years of experience. So it sounded like a great deal to me. I went into avionics, electronics, calibration. I was selected for a commission. Then I was second lieutenant, first lieutenant, captain as a communications officer. Guess what? Designing networks, doing IT, running the IT support groups, all of that. So had tours in Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, all around the country. I was in Greece for a while. The very difficult assignment of being stationed at Irakulon Air Station, Crete, Greece. So beautiful place. So I got a chance to see a good part of the world and get some great experience. And from there, I was a project manager for Mead, the paper company, and in their packaging division, and became the assistant to the IT director there for the Americas. And so we worked together quite well for almost 10 years. And then I got a call from Jamestown Properties, and they asked, hey, do you know anybody who might be interested in an international IT director position for a commercial real estate company? And the more we spoke about it, they're like, hey, we would really like you to come on. So we had a good experience together for about 8 years and left on great terms. So about 6 years ago, I started NiceNets Consulting, primarily to focus on IT solutions with companies. A lot of them don't have an IT person on staff. They don't even have even a support person. They've got no director, no CIO, no CTO, and they just need someone who's independent, who can help them make good decisions about their strategy, about their evolution, their technology roadmap, their mix of applications, and optimizing their flow. Also, in case of real estate, some things we'll touch on today. Their buildings, oftentimes the security in the buildings and the network being completely separate from what they're doing from the corporate network. In some cases they know what's going on, in other cases they don't. So we'll touch on that a little bit today too. So I really try to help them out in whatever component of their strategy they want and their growth trajectory, and help them make great choices. And the other good news is I don't sell anything. And so when they ask me for solutions, I try to give them a good mix of what's best for them, not something that necessarily benefits me, but something I can recommend to check out. We check it out together. I help them ask good questions during the interview process and during the vendor selection process, and then we make good choices as we move their technology along. So that works out very well. And it generally works out really well for clients that, like I was mentioning, they're smaller and they just don't have that kind of expertise on staff, and they just needed somebody on their side of the table. So that's my business model.
Thank you for sharing your journey, Chuck. That's what we call an adventurous journey and inspiration for many of us. And I remember attending one of your sessions at RealCom. So that was the first time we met.
Yeah, I do remember that. yeah, that's real common. It's changed a lot, now with COVID. Of course, they have to do so many more things virtual. So many of our sessions are webinars or they're online video sessions just like this in some cases. So it's very, very different now.
Yeah. So today's session is about operational technology and strategy. OT stands for operational technology. And as the word says, it's all the technology that is used to run the operational side of the buildings. Like there's a little IT involvement, but the convergence of IT and OT, especially because of the adoption of IoT, which is the Internet of Things, is going on for a while. And we have seen a lot of discussions around this space, while there is a strict division between them and the real world. So, what are some of the challenges you think are associated with the convergence of IT and OT?
Okay, well, let me see if I can touch on a few because when I knew we were going to talk about this, I thought about it a little bit. And one of the interesting things when it comes to those two mindsets, and they really are two separate mindsets when it comes from a managing perspective. The technology, the IT technology is typically referring to the corporate team. So what are we doing for software upgrades? What are we doing to meet our business needs? A lot of the things that I discussed that corporations want to understand. They want to understand what are good selections for vendors. How do I get a good mix of my portfolio? How do I integrate my data? How can I protect my business through policies, my business culture, and everything from securing the network with firewalls and password policies. And that really becomes evident when you're doing onboarding or offboarding, or someone has a role change. Maybe they're being promoted to an administrator of an application, for example, or maybe they've moved from one department to the other. And we have to make sure their login, all of their permissions when they come in. They can see what they need to see, and they don't see what they don't need to see. And that is typical type of strategy for the IT group. Whereas before, the OT group, they're all about the building management systems, and they want to be able to control the lighting and the heating, the HVAC, the access control, who gets into a building and who gets out, and oftentimes that is a completely different mindset, because you'll see, with buildings, the building owner wants to rent the best space to tenants who pay for the space. So typically, building engineers are relegated to the basement in some small room using an engineering room. Maybe it's the telephone closet or the IT closet where all of the cables come in. And it's generally not nearly as sophisticated and not a pretty office space, because it's not something they can rent out. Well, over the years, the building engineers then really didn't want to be changing their password all the time, or have these long, complicated passwords that expire every 90 days. And they would oftentimes even just set up their equipment, and it was not unusual to see something like a Windows NT or Windows 7 that hasn't been updated in years, still being used today to control some of those critical systems on the network, the building management system, as well as maybe even the industrial control systems. And so, yeah, so they and sometimes you might even see, walking into a room like that, you might see the passwords and the login written down on the whiteboard right next to the machine. And so from the IT perspective, you see that and you're like, oh my gosh, this is not good, because we're opening ourselves up to potential hacking, or it's easy for someone to get in. Whereas on the OT side, the building engineer says, look, I want to be able to have ease of access. I want to be able to have my team members be able to do this. And then even worse, they might have set up an RDP login, remote desktop protocol, that is not very secure at all. And they want to be able to get into their building system because they're tired of driving 45 minutes, an hour, hour and a half from their home at 2 o'clock in the morning when an alarm is going off. So they want to be able to get access their system. So that's sort of how that evolution began, where the building engineers really didn't have those levels of policies and controls on those systems. And in some cases, I've even seen this one. This is a bad one. This was one where I walked in and the building engineer, who was very sophisticated, he understood. And he had decided to put a dual NIC card into the PC that was running the building systems so that he could connect both to the IT corporate network and the building network, because he didn't want to have to go into dial out and dial into his system to check his email, right? So he wanted to bridge those two systems together, which he effectively then bridged the IT corporate network with the building network that was not secure at all. So those kinds of things, we see those from time to time whenever we see a system. And so that convergence now, especially when the OT became part of the responsibility for the IT director or the CIO or the CTO, they're like, wait a minute. We've got to put some controls on these networks because we need to be able to have some level of security. And with the introduction of more and more IoT devices, the field of targets became critically expanded. And so now, if the system was not secure, no firewall, easy passwords like login, like admin with password admin, right? You still find those today. Well, now the number of targets for sensors and for valve systems, intelligent valve systems, or voice over IP phone systems, or video cameras that are now IP instead of being more standalone. And the rich target field became a paradise for anyone who was going to hack into the system, right? So now they could take over control of these things. And so it became very important and really top of mind to be able to start to secure those systems and bring those under control. I think we started to talk before a little bit about the impact of COVID. Well, in the last year, so much more had to be done remotely. So because the offices had to close, they had to distance, they had to clean, they had to do all of those things. So remote access became enormously important to all of these different businesses. And because of that, they had to send everyone home. Well, the threats now started to increase exponentially because they're saying, okay, we've got more people at home, more people accessing the system remotely. Now we can exploit more of those dangers and get into those systems a little bit easier. So the number of cyber attacks starts to go way up because more and more people are working remotely. So it's more of a cascade effect where now the number of IoT devices have expanded. The number of people working from home has expanded. The number of threats have expanded. And so for those companies that don't know that their OT, their operational technology networks in the buildings are unsecure. Sometimes they have no idea what they're actually running there. They might have even outsourced it to a third-party property management team, which came with a third-party building engineer. So, and the question was never asked. They just were really looking for results. And so now a lot more attention is being spent analyzing those to see what is the threat and where we are on the risk level. So that's sort of how we got to where we are today. Does that make sense?
Mm. And like you mentioned about RDP, and with COVID, the remote access has also become a very important part of OT. So I remember when we do assessment, one common thing that we see on every building system computer, we see a free version of TeamViewer installed.
Right.
Yes, absolutely. So this all ties to the IT OT security strategy. And as you know, it ties to the business context, which we often miss adding the business context when it comes to IT and OT strategy. So it's really important when what the company needs, the efficiency, the greater differentiation, or being a market leader or generating a new source of revenue. So that in turns like types of IoT application that is required for the business, the security that is required, the existing infrastructure. So all these are tied to the security strategy. So what are the key factors you think should be considered moving to a centralized and coordinated IT OT security strategy?
It's a great question. I appreciate you asking that because it's becoming significantly more important today to have that strategy. And the fundamental answer is we have to know what we have. You have to know based on a real assessment of what is your level of risk associated with each of these buildings. And it can constantly change, you know, as new tenants are moving in and out, and the projects are going on within the building, construction is going on within the building. Perhaps I'm bringing in more dark fiber into the building, or perhaps we're bringing in alternate sources of telecommunications, rooftop access, for example. Maybe I've got microwave shots that I have to deal with. And so that strategy that we were just seeing, bringing them together in one group to consolidate into IT. Number one, I have to know what I have. So the assessment is so key. I have to know what is our standard operating system. What are we doing at other buildings that we want to integrate into these buildings? So, for example, if I want to change our HVAC controls or our building management controls or our environmental systems, and we're moving to more artificial intelligence controlled systems, well, if a new acquisitions comes on, I've got to understand how we're going to do that piece. You know, if we're trying to reduce our energy footprint, one of the things that's happening today in several buildings, especially the larger structures, is the HVAC systems are starting to become controlled using artificial intelligence. And that's really interesting because, you know, we think about in a building structure, and this is just basic finance, right? You have all of your costs and you have all of your income. And the difference between income and costs is net operating income, right? That's going to be those pieces. And from your income, you've got income from rent, your tenants, you've got investors, you've got other sources of income bringing that in. I wrote a paper on this not too long ago, and we did a webinar, and I gave a talk about it. Some of the expenses, of course, one of the biggest expenses are utilities. So in these buildings, just HVAC and can consume 50% to 60% of the expenses going into the building. So if our difference is our net operating income, and I can reduce my expenses, look, I just expanded my net operating income, which then actually can increase the valuation of the building. So what's interesting about that is it all relies now on data. And so it's no longer just thermostats setting something at a set point and the different zones within the building. Now I can combine that information. You think about it today. You're in Toronto, I'm in Atlanta. Whether it's snowing or it's sunny, the impact on your heating and cooling is affected by the outside weather. Well, guess what? I can pull up my phone today and I know I can look at the weather app and I know what the weather is going to be at your precise location 4 hours from now, right? And so they're taking advantage of that kind of information to say, let's control the HVAC systems using micro adjustments. So I don't have to wait until if I have my heat setting set to 72, for example, I don't have to wait until it goes down to below the set point to fire up all of the furnace and the blowers and all that, and they all come on at 100% level, right? And they're all blowing onto those zones that have been affected by the set point change. And so they continue to do that until the temperature goes up beyond the set point, and then they all shut off, and then it goes back down, right? Well, now these systems are looking at, they're looking at what was the demand on that zone, that room on the east side of the building when the sun is coming up in February 1st last year, or what is the forecast for today on how it's going to impact that building. And they can begin to make micro adjustments in each different zone based on not only on what the setting is, but what the temperature is outside and the temperature is going to be. And it could also be, guess what? Every Monday at 11 a.m. Eastern time, 25 people come into this room to have a meeting. And the O2, the carbon dioxide levels, the oxygen levels change every single Monday at 11 a.m. Well, so if the systems know that in advance, they can again make more micro adjustments so that the fans are not coming on at 100%, they're coming on at 40%. And so I can drive my energy costs down by just reducing the draw just from HVAC within multiple zones. And so part of that OT process is starting to pull data from the IoT sensors, from temperature sensors, from oxygen sensors, from water demands, and they're starting to make predictions about what the demands are going to be. And it feeds that back into the HVAC system. And buildings now are starting to be controlled using hundreds and thousands of micro adjustments versus waiting for the set point to hit and all of the fans come on together. And so having that system be secure, having it understand what the IoT devices are doing can be a big part of what the CIOs, CTOs, and their integration is starting to happen to provide that level of feedback, and also to reduce costs and provide real value for the building itself. So it's fascinating to me.
Yes, and we know that even running a building with vacant spaces also incur cost. So with data from these IoT sensors, analytics platform, if we combine this, definitely if it's used in a efficient manner, these insights really help saving a cost.
Yeah, because you mentioned even some of the IoT sensors we're talking about measure the amount of human traffic, because they can use infrared. They can use heat signatures, so there's no compromise over personal identity, or there's no issues with personal identifiable information. So it really can just go by, is there a physical human being in this space, or at certain times of the day, are we seeing large conglomerations of humans that get together that then impact the temperature and impact the CO2 levels and impact the number of calls, the number of calls being made to the building engineers that are just complaints about too hot and too cold. If you can cut those down by doing this kind of proactive integration of the IT and the OT, we can now we can have, guess what, more satisfied customers, more satisfied tenants. They're more attracted to your building because your building is doing the right things. It's their rent can be impacted. It can actually go down because you're running a more efficient building. The sustainability can be enhanced because you're running a more efficient building. And so I did a blog some time ago on building scores, right? How when we think about the evaluation of a building today, they value buildings, and it can be based on LEED certification. So if you are, silver or gold or platinum, or you combine that, say, with a wired score, that you know how well connected this building can be for dark fiber, for telecom, for Wi-Fi, for cable, for all of the vendors. Are they in the building, and is the building lit? Is it hot? Where I can just order up a circuit from whatever vendor I need, because they're all represented inside the space. That is a much more attractive building than, say, the one right next to it, right? That doesn't have those things. So if I'm attracting tenants, I want to market the fact that we have enhanced our building sustainability, we've enhanced our efficiency, we are enhanced our safety, because we're doing things that recommended by the CDC guidelines. I can use that to my advantage to attract and retain tenants for a much longer time. So if I can reduce the number of times they have to call for something so minor as too hot or too cold, then I get happy tenants is happy landlord, right?
Absolutely. And this not only helps achieving operational excellence, but also tenant retention and tenant engagement.
That's right. Yeah.
Thank you, Chuck. Thank you for sharing all those practical insights and sharing those use cases, how we can embrace IoT.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.